I'm thinking every moment, every second of the day, where's my baby?
His family is desperate for answers.
I believe that this area in particular is known for KKK, cults, underworld fighting.
By the time we got up there, his girlfriend wasn't really helping. She was like speaking in like riddles and stuff. Like it was weird.
In my experience, she was acting way out of line.
This episode of Disappeared retraces Devontae's last known steps.
This case does haunt me because this is not a normal case.
I'm like, if something happened to my brother, like did something happen to my brother?
Right away, I'm like, we need to get up there because this is just not like Devontae.
The more people who know Devontae's story, the greater the chance of bringing him home. Share on social media. Get the word out.
My name is Terry, and I am Devontae's mother. He was born special. From day one, everyone took to him, starting with the nurses. It's his aura, It was before he even laughed. It was just him. I guess just amazing eyes. He's always had an amazing soul. I have never met a person that didn't, take to him.
Devontae is my big brother. I know growing up around Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, I wanted to be just like him. Now, I probably could have got a wish where they was like, you could turn into a big brother if you wanted to. I probably would have did it. He was always popular. All the girls loved him. My brother is very musically inclined. He loved to freestyle, make music. He likes to sing, play the drums, and play the piano.
My name's Ruthie. I'm Devontae's auntie. Devontae had a stuttering problem for about, I want to say about a good 11, 12 years of his life. And it probably would take him about 5 minutes to get a whole full sentence out. The only time he didn't have a stuttering issue was when he was singing or rapping, which is crazy. You can get him to entertain, perform anywhere on a drop of a dime.
He sang in a choir and he helped with the kids in church. He's a leader.
So family meant everything to Devontae. He never missed a baby shower, a birthday party, kids' birthday parties, kids' births, christening. He was there. His comfort zone was home, church, our neighborhood here in San Francisco, and he really didn't go too much past that.
He didn't like to be away from home much. He was big on staying close to the ones that he loved. But in 2019, my brother met a new girl and they started dating.
Devontae met his girlfriend at the Stone Grove concert in the avenues of San Francisco. It was pretty spontaneous, a fluke. They met eyes and she just never left his sight.
My brother was doing different things and he was being happy. She brought him to Vegas. She was bringing him to beaches and stuff. I've never seen my brother do these kind of things, and these are always things I've always wanted my brother to do.
She was about, 20 years older than him, give or take. But the girl was smart. She was a life coach at one point. And she was able to pull Devontae from out of his comfort zone.
I never wanted to make an issue about her age. I just wanted my son to be happy and live life, But I did see, a lot of red flags.
Devontae and his girlfriend loved to go to a lot of places. And on May 4th, they decided to drive off to Mount Shasta, which is 4 hours north of San Francisco. They were just doing a bed and breakfast type of deal. And his nephew's birthday party was gonna be on May 5th. So he was planning to return home to San Francisco the next day for the birthday party.
Well, I called his girlfriend's phone knowing that my brother's phone was broken. And he seemed pretty at peace and calm and happy about being somewhere different. It was the last time we spoke.
My name is Tessa Kluwer, and I was born and raised in Mount Shasta, and I'm currently the mayor. Mount Shasta is a small, close-knit community. We do have a lot of different visitors because people want to come to a small town and disconnect for a while. And Mount Shasta definitely appeals to those that want to come here for spiritual purposes. Some believe that the mountain itself provides healing aspects or properties to them. We also have the headwaters of the Sacramento River that are said to hold some cleansing and spiritual aspects as well.
And I know his girlfriend is spiritual. She likes to collect her crystals and sage and all of that.
She's always talking about the stars and the numbers and alignment, all this stuff.
On May 5th, 2020, that night, my brother's girlfriend called me and told me, man, we got into an argument. He left and he hasn't came back. You know how Devontae is. I don't remember hearing distraught or worry in her voice. And I think that played a big part in me kind of being okay, well, let's give it some time. Because I know if y'all arguing, he probably felt like he could just walk off and feel like it's cool. It didn't really sound like it was a pressed emergency when she reached out to me. I just remember initially thinking it wasn't real weird.
Once Thursday, May 7th came, the girlfriend called Anthony, his brother, and said that Devontae was missing since Tuesday, May 5th. Right away, I'm like, we need to get up there because this is just not like Devontae. She called me and I said, we're on our way, but I need you to go make a police report. Not now, but right now.
My name is Sergeant Pretty with the Mount Shasta Police Department. An official missing persons report was filed on May 7th at 9:16 a.m. by Devontae Morgan's girlfriend. Devontae Morgan's girlfriend initially told us that they checked into a local motel and got a rental car on the 4th of May. She said in the early hours of May 5th, she was awoken by Devontae to come outside and have a cigarette. She was mad at Devontae for waking her to come outside and have a cigarette. They realized that they left the hotel key inside the hotel and they called the after-hours service to get let back in. An on-call manager came down and let them both back in.
Devontae's comfort zone was home, but due to where he was at, he didn't even want to go smoke a cigarette out there by himself.
They continued to fight till the early hours of May 5th. At that point, she said that they went walking their separate ways to cool off. So they both left the hotel.
She just put it like he just walked off on her, so we didn't take it to the extreme. We kind of took it with a grain of salt in a way because this is what he does. He'll get away from her if he needs to.
She wanted to go see the sunrise, and Devontae went the other direction. In the morning on May 5th, she saw Devontae on the other side of the street on North Mount Shasta Boulevard, walking in a different direction. She stated that he still looked mad, so she continued back to the motel. Devontae Morgan's girlfriend explained that this is common in their relationship, that when they get into fights, they both agree to go separate ways for cooling off. But now it's been over 24 hours and this is not normal. Devontae Morgan's girlfriend told the officer that he was wearing black sweatpants and had on 49er flip-flops. And she said that his phone was broken. She didn't act upset, she acted, loony. She was all over the place. She did not seem too concerned or sad or upset that he has not been found. In my experience, she was acting way out of line for someone that she should be caring about filing a missing persons report.
Usually missing people in Mount Shasta need a rescue on the mountain or that type of thing. So to hear that someone could potentially be missing and they're not off of a hiking trail, it was definitely alarming.
for the family. We went up to Mount Shasta immediately. At that point, I was really worried. I was spooked. I just remember being afraid, like, what if we can't find him?
On the drive up there, I'm thinking every moment, every second of the day, where's my baby and what happened to him? Where did he go?
I just was like, just on save the day mode. I know that his girlfriend knows more. She was with him, and I won't answer. Before Devontae went missing, he was going through some things emotionally. He was in a very, very hurt space.
In 2017, he was shot on our front porch from a bullet that was meant for someone else. He was shot in the pelvis and in the hand.
It wasn't his fault. He wasn't a person that was involved in like any problems or any type of street issues. He was definitely like mistargeted. I think somebody rode by and thought he was somebody else. I know that did affect him, like, 'cause that is his safe haven, it is his home.
What a freak accident to get shot on his own porch for a bullet meant for someone else. So pretty much at 25 years old, he felt as if his life has stopped.
I think what a lot of people don't think of or understand is like when you get shot, there's the physical pain you gotta recover from, and there's like a big traumatic like mental thing you have to like overcome, and it's hard. So he definitely did like smoke weed or like drink some alcohol like to help cope with the pain.
He wouldn't let it keep him down. He pushed himself to heal more quickly than he should have. And it caused him to walk with a slight limp. And it caused him to be depressed. Like, why me? I'm a good person. I'm good to everybody. Why did this happen to me?
He still seemed prayerful and hopeful, but he admitted that he just wasn't well. It got hard for him.
He's kind of private. He wouldn't want to share that much. But I pretty much had to push him, to let him know that life is not over and God has a plan for him. That's why he's still here.
He definitely wanted to get clean, wanted to be sober. He used to go to the gym every day, and that kept him sober. He definitely was trying to still progress, but it's hard.
That's something that I think the girlfriend definitely took advantage of and kept him like a carrot on a string with. She kept the alcohol and the bottles going because I think she did drugs herself.
Before he went missing, they definitely fought a lot. I know that they weren't a happy couple, I would say that.
She was very, very demanding, and she wanted to always pick a fight. She wanted to make sure that she was being heard, let's put it that way.
Even though they had weird and irritating long arguments, I never thought about my brother just go missing.
We went up to Mount Shasta on a Thursday, May 7th, and my ride going up to Mount Shasta was so blurry. I need to get a conversation with the girlfriend. I need to talk to her right now.
By the time we got up there, his girlfriend wasn't really help. She was speaking in riddles and stuff. It was weird.
When I talked to her, she makes sure to give this narrative of him just walking off in the sunset with a pina colada versus explaining that this is just something he would never do.
You could tell in her mind, it was spinning. It was spinning and it was constantly going and it was stuff and it was just different stuff and she was just blurting it out. she'd be like, oh, Devontae's here. I can feel him, he's here. Oh, I think it's crazy. But like this don't make sense, because if the trees started talking to the moon and the moon started talking to the star, like she was doing stuff like that to the point that it had us like, oh my God. Like we couldn't even like fully like take her serious so much, but we were trying to because she was the only person that was there, but she felt like everything she had us doing was like throwing us off. I'm like, why is she crazy? What happened? That was a big thing for me. I'm like, if something happened to my brother, like did something happen to my brother, because why is she loopy?
Something was wrong. And thinking back now, something happened to him while in her presence. I believe that the girlfriend had something to do with Devontae going missing.
Her narrative was almost like derailing purposely to give this like voluntary missing story.
In my opinion, the police department didn't take it seriously. By him being a 28-year-old, and to them, you know, he probably got tired of her and walked away. Knowing my child, I tried to enforce them to do more.
I feel like there's certain type of disappearances that get more recognition than someone like my nephew. I feel like because he's a Black African-American man, later in his age too, just like kind of just flows off people's back.
We thought maybe Devontae Morgan just went and got another hotel and didn't want to be around the girlfriend. But as soon as the family showed up, we could see just by speaking to them that they were extremely concerned, completely opposite of how Devontae's girlfriend was acting, and we knew it was serious. And it sounds like he was an extremely family-oriented guy, and he would not just voluntarily go missing without at least calling his brother. Devontae Morgan's girlfriend told us that his phone was broken, so a ping might not bring up an accurate location to search. So unfortunately, phone records were not helpful.
The police didn't have any information for us, no leads. I was frustrated.
So we made our first official flyers and gathered a search party. In the woods, it's not a good combination. We love you, Vontae. You know we love you. We out here.
We gotta put out flyers and talk to everybody that we could, to the point where we'll be on the street, somebody be passing by in a car, walking up and went, excuse me, my brother's missing, can I please just give you a flyer?
Meanwhile, the girlfriend keeps saying, on this day, Devontae's gonna show up, he's gonna manifest, he's gonna reappear and all this. So at this point, everybody's scared of her, you know, like, what is she trying to do to us? I mean, what happened to my son?
Then we got a report from a local resident that she had remembered a couple fighting outside of her house on May 5th, the day Devontae Morgan went missing. The resident is located just north of the Cold Creek Inn, and she heard them fighting at 9:30 in the morning. Devontae's girlfriend initially told us that they did not speak to each other that morning. This contradicts what the witness saw and heard with her timeline. We are now growing way more suspicious of the girlfriend, but we don't have any hard evidence against the girlfriend.
All she kept saying is that where she was emotionally and what she was going through while she was up in Mount Shasta. And I remember me stopping her and saying, I don't give a about you. I don't. I'm here for my nephew. She needed to go home, back to San Francisco.
So he asked his girlfriend to leave. And we never really heard from her after that.
Due to the strange circumstances with Devontae Morgan's girlfriend, we did change it to not voluntary missing, but to suspicious missing persons case. I believe she knows more than she's giving. We don't have anything to charge her with, hold her on.
I was just like, I'm not gonna get any answers. And I'm like, at this point, I didn't trust nobody to find my brother but me.
It's May 14th, and we still don't have any hard leads. So right now we are trying to track Devontae Morgan as best we can through surveillance. Surveillance is really huge for us in Mount Shasta because we are such a small agency and such a small town. We don't have CCTV like a lot of bigger cities. So when someone does go missing in the city limits of Mount Shasta, we immediately try to hop on that and go to local businesses just so we can see if they have cameras that caught anything. We were able to obtain 10 different camera angles of Devontae walking. It's the first time we locate Devontae Morgan on May 5th, the date he went missing. We have him walking in front of the police department, and you can see him crossing the street on North Mount Shasta Boulevard, now heading west on Lake Street. We catch him walking again west on Lake Street, where he continues walking. And then we'll see him cross Lake Street and go to the local Valero gas station. So then next we know he's at Valero. So we go to Valero and try to get their surveillance system. And this is where we get Devontae Morgan in this clip making a purchase. So after Devontae Morgan made the purchase, he headed back east on Lake Street past the police department and then headed back north the way he came on North Mount Shasta Boulevard. And the next known footage we have is at the Jefferson Soul on the North Mount Shasta Boulevard, which is approximately a quarter mile north of the Cold Creek Inn. So he has passed the hotel and he's continuing to walk. Approximately 2 minutes later, he is seen passing Jefferson Soul, now heading south back towards the Cold Creek Inn on North Mount Shasta Boulevard. He also is picked up on Chestnut Street by a local crystal store on their surveillance, where he is seen heading north on Chestnut Street and then making a right-hand turn heading east on Alma Street. The next known location Devontae is picked up on camera is on Alma Street, heading east, and the Sisson Middle School picked him up on camera. And he's continuing to walk east on Alma Street. Sisson Middle School also picks him up on another camera, continuing on Alma Street till he hits Rockefeller. Devontae then is seen crossing Rockefeller before he turns west, heading down Rockefeller, which would continue back down towards the Cold Creek Inn. And he doesn't appear to be drunk. He doesn't appear to be on drugs. And that's the last time we have him on video surveillance. Everywhere Devontae was picked up on security camera is a very normal, safe place to be walking. There is no suspicious activity. This is where all the mom and pop shops are. It's a very normal place to see someone walking every day, all day. After reviewing the pattern and the path that Devontae is seen walking, it doesn't seem out of the ordinary at all. It's all within a couple-minute walking distance of the hotel that he's staying at. And it's a beautiful day, and he's just casually out on a stroll.
Did he seem distraught? Did he seem like he was all over the place? Did he seem like he was just walking, trying to get a breath of fresh air, and he was gonna go back to the hotel? And we're like, oh my God, because this is just another key, piece to the puzzle.
He looked normal. He just looked like he was going for a stroll, like enjoying the town. It seemed like he was chilling, finding his peace.
So then we received a tip that between 9:30 and 10 a.m., a local mail delivery person stopped and saw Devontae in the area of Rockefeller and Alma. He looked a little disoriented and asked for instructions to a hotel over on Alma Street. The mailman expressed to him that we don't have any hotels on Alma Street, but we have an apartment complex there, and gave Devontae directions to that. The Alma Street apartment complex is not near the Cold Creek Inn. The mailman later saw Devontae Morgan on Alma Street, but not near the apartment complex. So he stopped again and rerouted him to that area. Later, the same mailman located Devontae Morgan off of Rockefeller on Ski Bowl Drive. This time he did not stop to speak with him. So after reviewing all the surveillance and nailing down all the times we've spotted Devontae Morgan, we are looking to see, is he heading out of town or is he heading up the mountain so we can branch out? Or we're looking to see if he's picked up by someone, a vehicle, the girlfriend, we don't know.
Just because that he was last seen walking in downtown certainly doesn't mean that that's where he went missing. Our downtown is only 2 miles in length and very condensed. Once you get outside of the downtown, it's definitely easy to get lost.
In Mount Shasta, we have never had a case like this, and so it was extremely new to us and hard to deal with because we don't have a detective unit. We have one officer at a time. We don't have search dogs. We don't have a lot of resources that, a bigger city would have. By this time in the investigation, we had followed up on every lead, and we realized that we needed outside support. In my experience, this missing persons case was unusual, and it continued to get more unusual.
My name is Michael Burns. I was a former deputy with the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office, and I ran the search and rescue program in Siskiyou County for about 7 years. We began a search and rescue for Mr. Morgan in the general area here. We set what we call a wheel, a hub. We did it at a half-mile radius from the parking lot right behind me at the library. We started off with canvassing the area with SAR volunteers, with vehicles, going door to door, handing out missing person flyers, asking anybody if they had seen Mr. Morgan walking or in the vicinity. That search area expanded into our wooded areas here. There's several wooded areas through in that hub that we expanded into. We used search dogs. At that point, we were using air scent and tracking dogs in the wooded areas within our search hub.
They tell us the best time to start searching is that 24 to 48 hours after they gone missing, because after that, it's hard to distinguish what has happened. By the time 48 hours came along, that's when we were reporting him missing. Honestly, I felt like those searches were just done because we complained long enough and got to get it done. Not done because, oh yeah, we're about to find him. What's going on? He's missing? Okay, well, we need to go here. We need to look here. We need to look there. But it wasn't that.
We got one search that was just so vague and just so we did that ourselves.
We expanded our searches out by asking Southern Oregon Search and Rescue to assist in our area. And we expanded out a mile outside of the area he was last seen and searched all possible areas. We expanded them as far as we could naturally take care of and use the resources for. Siskiyou County is 4 million acres of wilderness, the complete size of Hawaii. Outside of that, you have millions and millions of acres of just woodland where it would be impossible and a waste of resource to continue searching without any leads. I do feel that we went above and beyond and still are to this day.
In the search area that we searched, we did not locate anything pertaining to Mr. Morgan.
So as of 1 month into this investigation, we had followed up on every lead. We'd had search and rescue. We had multiple outside agencies as far down as San Francisco asking for help, the FBI, and we just still did not have any viable leads, and we were hitting dead ends.
We didn't have the biggest support from the police department, and we needed things to start rolling. I believe that this area in particular is known for all these dark side underworld type living. Underworld as in KKK, cults, underworld fighting. I'm like, anything could happen to Devontae, anything.
Last seen May 5th, 2020. If you have any information, please contact the Mount Shasta Police Department at 530-926-7540.
By June 8th, it started to feel like everything got dried up in Mount Shasta. So it was very vital for us to just do stuff and put action into finding him. We had to do other things.
We were trying to broadcast my brother every way we can. I wanted to set Mount Shasta on fire.
We went, knocked door to door. Whatever businesses were open, we put up flyers and, in the local establishments that were open and in every car and every pole in the city and the surrounding towns. And there is a hotline and there is the $25,000 reward.
We would go to supermarkets and snatch the loudspeaker and we're going up to different parts of mountains, suspicious places that people really normally aren't going to. We went in, but the people who were around the Mount Shasta were not inviting, and they definitely didn't want us there.
It's also definitely a predominantly white area. There's a very handful of black people that stay there. It wasn't ultimately comfortable. It's known that we found out being out there they had active KKK, and I heard the leader or somebody who runs the KKK drive through the town with a big Confederate flag on the side of the truck. And that was something we had to see every day.
My interaction with everybody was peaceful, but Mount Shasta is, I hate to say it in this day and age, racist. That wasn't too helpful.
We would spend the whole day putting up flyers. We would spend all the way hours, and we'll come out the next morning, they all be gone, except for a few. Even some stores were taking them down after we put them up in there. Why are people taking it down? Is it just because he's a black male that's missing up here, or is it because there's somebody somewhere that doesn't want him to be seen and broadcast on a bigger level across town because something malicious might have happened? I remember we went up to a campsite and we began to show him flyers, "Hey, have you seen my brother?" Took the flyer and was like, "No, we ain't seen him, but if we do, we'll tie him to a tree in the back and give you a call." Same person pulled out guns on us and was like, we had to leave off the property. It was upsetting.
We knew that we were in an area that was not safe for us. We were told, don't come this way, don't look this way. We got a bird, what was it, a chicken foot thrown at us? A live chicken foot thrown at us while we were putting up fires. It's like the Twilight Zone up there, seriously. And when nightfall, it was just a different feel. It seemed nice, but when that nightfall, you seen what it really, the skeletons of the town, the dark side of the town. We definitely made it clear that we were here for peace, but we definitely didn't back down either. No one was gonna drive us away. We made that clear.
Hate crimes do have to be reported to the Department of Justice, and I know for a fact in the last 10 years that I've worked for the department, we have not reported one.
We are Mount Shasta, and we are very equality-based and would love diversity. We are a community of a lot of different people. We were founded by Italian immigrants who came to work in the lumber mill. That's kind of how it started. And we are still a majority Italian-American community that has now grown. And our surrounding communities are largely diverse, more so than we are, but we would welcome diversity with open arms.
We were walking on public property, and then you'll just get into private property and you don't know. So you'll be told and you'll be warned. And I think he was murdered by someone for that. But as I start learning of all what took place, I'm like, Lord knows what could have happened.
I think he could have been targeted because he was an outsider and from the city. If they were targeting black people out there, I don't know. I felt like maybe there was some foul play.
We are not a racist community. We are a community of love and respect and open arms. And setting foot into this community, it would take 10 minutes to know that that's exactly who we are.
What is going on up here? Something's going on up here and it's not making sense. And then I heard from an older dude, he was walking out of Burger King. And I was like, oh, excuse me, you think I could have a moment of your time? I want to talk to you about my brother. He was like, your brother? He's like, Devontae's your brother? I'm like, yeah, Devontae, that's my blood brother. And he told me, this is what I personally heard. He said, these guys drove him somewhere and then was try to rob him for his money. My brother's not going for it. So fought, and they ended up stabbing him and pushing him in the river.
Devontae Morgan's brother heard one story that Devontae Morgan had been taken in a white van and went to a rural area out in the woods behind our lake called Twin Arrows.
It's a wooded campground up behind Lake Siskiyou. It's about 4 miles outside of town.
We did send an officer out there and were not able to locate anything, and several people were contacted confirming that Devontae Morgan had not been at that area. After investigating the area of Twin Arrows and speaking to everyone, we did not feel it was important to search the river, so everything came to a dead end.
We put the money on the reward, but we would get these big stories from people, and it would just be like a dead end. We were distraught. We didn't know what to do.
At this time, the family has also offered a reward for his return. So having a reward with a missing person is great and does generate lots of good leads, but unfortunately, there are some leads that come in where people are just trying to take advantage of the reward money with no factual evidence. In February 2021, almost a year later, Devontae Morgan is still missing, and we still don't have any hard leads. Once you're entered into a database for missing persons, which is a nationwide database, anytime a body is located that matches the descriptors, they will then put a hit out that, hey, this is a possible match. So we now are looking for DNA from family relatives so we can enter that into the DNA database to help us generate new leads.
So it took me a while to do it because I was scared, I was nervous, I didn't want to because I thought maybe they might have found him dead. But I did have my DNA taken here.
On September 17, 2021, we got a possible match of a male matching the description of Devontae Morgan, who was unfortunately burned up in a fire. They were found in Jackson County, Oregon, which is approximately an hour and a half away from us. And so we took it as a very good lead. Unfortunately, because he was burned, we had to go into dental records and then DNA. It was at that point eliminated that it was not Devontae.
It's frustrating that my nephew is still not here.
The police never offered any helicopters, never a search party bigger than my family and the few people in town. And it didn't even seem like they cared enough about my brother.
To this day, almost 3 years after the initial investigation started, we still have the case open. We are still actively getting interest in the case, and we are still getting information, and we are following up on every lead that does come in. And I know the family does feel that we are not doing enough, but we are a very small department, and this was a very, very big case and a very big workload for our department and the few officers that we did have. And I do believe throughout the community, my police department, Devontae's family, we all want the same thing. We want to find Devontae. In my 10 years in law enforcement with the Mount Shasta Police Department, this case does haunt me because this is not the type of community we live in.
As a mayor and as more so just a community member of Mount Shasta, we would really love him to be found. One of our community members is missing and we want him back.
I don't think he's passed on because I don't feel that. And I believe my son is still out there and he can't, for whatever reason, he can't come home. He can't call us. He can't, I don't know what the reason is, but whatever it is, I feel he's still there and he's waiting for my help.
We tried to get his girlfriend to help us,
But she hasn't.
I think his girlfriend was straight up the cause of him being missing. I believe that there's so much more to her story, and I want and I pray that one day that her conscience will eat her up so much to where she'll come forth.
There's not 1 second, not 1 second that goes by that I don't think about him.
I just try to keep hope and keep understanding, but holding on to this hope is also hard. And I missed you, Devontae.
Now, I just want to let him know that how much I love him and how much him being gone has affected the whole family. And not just our family, our community.
Our family has not been the same since he's been missing, since he's been gone. We can't do nothing without remembering his smile, his laugh, his handsome face, most beautiful eyes, and just...
December arrives quietly in the English countryside. The fields around Ipswich do not announce the coming of winter with dramatic snowstorms or roaring winds. Instead, they surrender to a different kind of silence. Damp air hangs over the hedgerows long before sunrise. Bare branches stretch across narrow country roads like dark fingers. Morning fog rolls low across open farmland, swallowing fences, footpaths, and forgotten gateways until the landscape seems to disappear into a pale grey void. It is the kind of place where distance becomes difficult to judge and every shadow seems farther away than it truly is. To anyone passing through, Suffolk appears peaceful. The villages are small. The traffic is light. Brick cottages stand behind carefully trimmed gardens. Church towers rise above centuries-old rooftops. Farmers begin their mornings before daylight, and commuters drive toward Ipswich without imagining that, only a few miles away, police officers are searching fields, riversides, and woodland paths for someone who has vanished without explanation. Nothing about the landscape suggests that it is about to become the center of one of Britain's most disturbing murder investigations. At first, there is only absence. A daughter who does not answer her phone. A friend who misses an appointment. A familiar face that no longer appears on the same street corner after dark. For people living ordinary lives, these disappearances might not immediately trigger panic. Adults leave town. Phones lose battery. People drift away without warning. But among those who know the women working the streets of Ipswich, disappearances carry a different weight. Every night follows an unwritten routine. Cars slow beside the pavement. Conversations last only seconds. Doors open. Engines fade into darkness. Sometimes a woman returns within minutes. Sometimes an hour later. Sometimes just before dawn, tired but alive, carrying enough money to survive another day. That rhythm had existed for years. It was dangerous. It was unpredictable. Yet it was familiar. Then, in late autumn of 2006, the rhythm begins to break. One woman does not come back. Then another. People notice. They whisper names to one another beneath streetlights. Have you seen her? No. When was the last time? No one has a reassuring answer. Fear spreads quietly before anyone speaks the word killer. Among women working in Ipswich's red light district, danger is never an abstract idea. Every customer is a stranger. Every ride is a decision made in seconds. Most encounters end without violence, but experience teaches them to watch carefully. They memorize registration numbers whenever they can. They exchange warnings about aggressive clients. They recognize familiar vehicles. Survival often depends on instinct rather than certainty. That instinct begins telling them something is wrong. The streets themselves seem different. Cars that once represented opportunity now inspire hesitation. A customer rolling down his window is no longer simply another man looking for sex. He could be the last face someone ever sees. Meanwhile, families wait inside warm homes, believing ordinary explanations will eventually replace growing concern. Perhaps she is staying with friends. Perhaps she lost her phone. Perhaps she simply needs time. Hope delays panic. It almost always does. Missing person reports arrive one after another, each carrying photographs that freeze happier moments in time. Smiling faces. Birthdays. Family gatherings. Pictures taken years before addiction, homelessness, or life on the streets transformed daily existence. The photographs remind investigators of something easy for the public to forget. Every missing person existed long before becoming a headline. Every woman had a childhood. Every woman had people who remembered her laughter before remembering her addiction. Every woman had a name. As officers begin gathering information, they discover similarities that cannot be ignored. The missing women knew the same streets. Some knew each other personally. Others recognized familiar faces from the small community that existed after sunset. Their lives overlapped in ways invisible to most residents of Ipswich. During daylight, office workers hurried past those streets without making eye contact. At night, those same streets became an entirely different world. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement. Exhaust fumes drifted through cold air. Engines idled. Footsteps echoed between industrial buildings. Deals were made quickly. Names were rarely exchanged. Trust lasted only seconds. For many of the women standing there, survival depended on earning enough money before dawn. They understood the risks better than anyone else. But understanding danger does not eliminate it. It merely teaches people how to live beside it. As November turns toward December, police officers cannot yet see the full picture. Separate investigations continue. Separate files grow thicker. Separate detectives ask similar questions. Who saw her last? Which vehicle stopped? What route did she usually take? Who was expecting to hear from her? Each answer creates new possibilities. Each possibility creates more uncertainty. Then the countryside begins revealing its secret. On the morning of December 2nd, a body is discovered. The location feels strangely ordinary. No abandoned warehouse. No hidden cellar. No dramatic crime scene concealed beneath layers of earth. Instead, there is open countryside, cold, exposed, quiet. News travels quickly. Police establish cordons. Forensic investigators arrive carrying cameras, evidence bags, measuring equipment, and notebooks that will soon fill with observations recorded down to the smallest detail. Boot prints are photographed. Vegetation is examined. Every inch of ground becomes important. The discovery changes everything. A missing person investigation becomes a murder inquiry. Then comes another discovery. And another. Within only days, what had seemed impossible becomes undeniable. The victims are connected. Someone is hunting women. Someone knows exactly who to target. Someone moves through Ipswich without attracting attention. The realization lands like ice water across the entire county. Parents begin calling daughters more often. Taxi drivers discuss rumors between fares. Local businesses leave radios playing all day, waiting for updates. Television crews arrive from across Britain. Satellite vans line streets that rarely appear on national broadcasts. Reporters stand in heavy winter coats beneath overcast skies, describing events that still seem impossible to comprehend. 5 women. 5 lives. 5 families waiting for answers. And somewhere beyond the television cameras, beyond the police cordons, beyond the endless fields fading into winter fog, the person responsible continues living an ordinary life. He goes to work. He drives familiar roads. He passes police officers without raising suspicion. Perhaps he even watches the news. Perhaps he listens as reporters describe the growing fear gripping Suffolk. Perhaps he hears the names of the women. No one knows exactly what he is thinking. Investigators cannot yet see his face. They do not know his name. They do not know that one of the largest murder investigations in modern British history has already begun to close around him, one careful piece of evidence at a time. For now, all they know is this. 5 women have vanished from the same city. The countryside has begun returning their bodies. And somewhere inside the cold December darkness, a predator is still free. The investigation expands with a speed rarely seen in Suffolk. What begins as a search for answers soon becomes a race against time. Every passing hour carries the same terrifying possibility. If the killer has acted more than once, there is no reason to believe he has stopped. That thought settles over Ipswich like the winter fog itself, creeping into homes, workplaces, cafes, police stations, and every conversation that begins with the same uneasy question: who will disappear next? The city changes almost overnight. Ipswich has always been a place where history feels close. Medieval streets meet modern shopping centres. Narrow roads weave toward the waterfront, where old brick warehouses stand beside newer developments. During December, Christmas lights normally soften the grey skies, shop windows fill with decorations, and families prepare for the holidays. Yet in 2006, the festive atmosphere struggles to survive beneath an entirely different mood. People begin locking their doors a little earlier. Parents insist their children call as soon as they arrive home. Taxi drivers glance more carefully into their rearview mirrors. Women walking alone after sunset feel the weight of footsteps behind them, even when there is no one there. Fear has a remarkable way of altering ordinary routines. Streets that looked harmless only a week earlier suddenly seem unfamiliar. Empty bus stops become places people avoid. Quiet country roads no longer suggest peace, they suggest isolation. Every patch of woodland appears capable of hiding something terrible. For the women still working the streets, however, there is no easy choice. Most are living with addictions that dictate the rhythm of every day. Some have lost stable housing. Others have become estranged from their families. Many carry emotional scars invisible to strangers passing by. Survival is measured one day at a time, one client at a time, one small amount of money at a time. Leaving the streets is not as simple as deciding never to return. Bills remain unpaid. Withdrawal remains relentless. Hunger does not wait for danger to pass. Police officers know this. Outreach workers know this. The women know it better than anyone. As warnings spread through Ipswich, officers urge women involved in street prostitution not to work alone. Community organizations attempt to reach as many as possible, encouraging them to seek temporary shelter or contact support services. Some listen. Others do not. Not because they underestimate the risk, but because survival has already forced them to accept risks most people will never understand. Meanwhile, detectives begin reconstructing the final known hours of each missing woman. The process is painstaking. Every witness remembers something different. A conversation outside a convenience store. A cigarette shared beneath a street lamp. A car seen slowing near a familiar corner. Someone believes the vehicle was dark in color. Another insists it was silver. One witness recalls the driver speaking politely. Another cannot remember the driver's face at all. Human memory rarely behaves like a video recording. It is fragmented, emotional, influenced by stress and time. Investigators understand this. They cannot rely on certainty where none exists. Instead, they gather hundreds of fragments, hoping enough of them will eventually fit together. The emerging picture is troubling. The women disappeared over a relatively short period. They shared similar routines. Each had been seen in areas known for street prostitution. Each vanished before anyone realized a pattern was forming. The similarities are impossible to dismiss. Yet similarities alone do not identify a killer. The police response grows larger by the day. Additional detectives arrive from neighboring forces. Analysts begin organizing enormous amounts of information. Whiteboards fill with names, dates, maps, and timelines. Computer systems process records of phone calls, vehicle registrations, and previous police encounters. Every lead, however unlikely, receives attention because investigators cannot afford to overlook the one detail that matters. The scale of the operation becomes extraordinary. Officers search fields that stretch for miles, moving shoulder to shoulder across uneven ground despite freezing temperatures. Rivers are examined. Drainage ditches are inspected. Woodlands are combed with methodical precision. Specialists document every location connected to the victims, understanding that seemingly insignificant evidence, a single fiber, a footprint, a discarded object, may later become crucial. Forensic science demands patience. The public often imagines dramatic breakthroughs occurring within hours. Reality is slower. Evidence must be photographed before it is touched. Items must be carefully packaged to avoid contamination. Laboratories require time. DNA analysis cannot be rushed simply because the nation demands answers. Behind every scientific result lies hours of meticulous work performed by people whose names will never appear in headlines. As media coverage intensifies, reporters descend upon Ipswich in unprecedented numbers. News broadcasts repeat the victims' photographs throughout the day. Newspapers devote entire front pages to the developing investigation. Television cameras capture endless shots of police tape fluttering in the cold wind, detectives entering briefing rooms, and forensic tents standing alone in open fields. The phrase serial killer begins appearing with increasing frequency. It is a phrase that immediately transforms public perception. A murderer kills. A serial killer hunts. The distinction matters. If investigators are facing a serial offender, then every day without an arrest may represent another opportunity for violence. That possibility changes how resources are deployed. It changes how police communicate with the public. It changes how journalists frame every new development. The pressure becomes immense. Senior investigators face daily scrutiny. Government officials seek updates. National media demand information. Families plead for answers. Yet the detectives leading the inquiry know that haste can be as dangerous as delay. An arrest made without sufficient evidence risks allowing the real offender to remain free. Every decision must withstand the scrutiny of future court proceedings. Behind closed doors, strategy meetings continue late into the night. Large maps of Ipswich cover conference room walls. Colored markers identify the last confirmed sightings of each victim. Lines connect places, dates, and times. Analysts search for geographical patterns. Could the killer live nearby? Did he travel a regular route? Was he choosing familiar disposal sites? Or was he deliberately creating confusion? Behavioral specialists begin considering the offender's actions. The bodies had not been concealed in ways that suggested panic. Nor had they been left in crowded public places where immediate discovery was guaranteed. Instead, they were placed in locations where they would likely be found eventually. That detail attracts attention. It suggests planning, confidence, perhaps even control. Whoever committed these murders appeared capable of moving through the countryside without attracting suspicion. He understood roads that many outsiders would never notice. He seemed comfortable enough to return repeatedly without fear. Those observations do not identify him. But they begin describing him. Somewhere beyond the evidence bags, laboratory reports, and press conferences exists a man who has blended seamlessly into ordinary life. Someone who may have greeted neighbors politely. Someone who may have stopped for fuel on the drive home. Someone who may have appeared so unremarkable that nobody remembered seeing him. History has repeatedly shown investigators an uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous offenders rarely look dangerous. They often appear ordinary precisely because ordinary people do not expect evil to wear a familiar face. That realization lingers over every stage of the investigation. The killer is not hiding in the shadows every hour of every day. He is living among everyone else. And while detectives continue assembling thousands of separate pieces into a coherent picture, one question remains impossible to silence. If he succeeded 5 times already, what, exactly, will stop him from trying again? The question dominating every briefing room is no longer whether the deaths are connected. That answer has become painfully clear. The question now is how a single individual managed to move through an entire city without leaving behind enough evidence to reveal himself. Somewhere beyond the flood of information pouring into police headquarters, hidden beneath thousands of witness statements, phone records, forensic reports, and public tips, there has to be a mistake. Every offender makes one eventually. The challenge is surviving long enough to find it. For the families, however, investigations do not unfold as neat timelines of evidence and discovery. They unfold in moments that never leave them. A telephone ringing unexpectedly. A knock at the front door. The expression on an officer's face before a single word is spoken. Those moments divide life into 2 parts, everything before and everything after. Each victim leaves behind people who continue searching for familiar pieces of them. A photograph tucked inside a drawer. A birthday card written years earlier. A favorite song that suddenly becomes impossible to hear without remembering a smile. The headlines reduce them to statistics, to ages, occupations, and dates of disappearance. Their loved ones remember something entirely different. They remember voices, habits, laughter, arguments, apologies, dreams that never had the chance to become reality. As Britain watches the story unfold, another uncomfortable truth begins to emerge. Many members of the public know the victims only through a single description repeated endlessly in newspapers and television reports. They were women involved in street prostitution. For some, that label becomes the entire story. For others, it raises difficult questions about how society sees people living on its margins. Detectives refuse to allow those labels to shape the investigation. Every victim is treated with the same care, the same professionalism, and the same determination to uncover the truth. Crime scene investigators document every centimeter of ground with painstaking precision. Forensic specialists examine fibers so small they are nearly invisible to the naked eye. Analysts spend long nights comparing timelines that differ by only minutes. Behind every task lies the same commitment: these women deserve answers, and the person responsible must be found before another family receives the same devastating news. Outside the police operation, life continues because life always does. Shops open each morning. School buses follow familiar routes. Commuters complain about traffic. Christmas advertisements fill television screens. Yet beneath those ordinary routines, an invisible tension binds strangers together. Conversations begin with cautious optimism and end with uneasy silence. Every fresh news bulletin interrupts dinner tables. Every rumor spreads faster than the facts. People begin recognizing the names of roads they had never noticed before, simply because those roads have appeared on the evening news. The killer remains unseen. He does not send letters. He does not claim responsibility. He offers no explanation, no manifesto, no public display demanding attention. His silence becomes one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. It forces investigators to speak on his behalf through evidence alone. Every tire track, every fiber, every trace of DNA becomes part of a conversation with someone who has chosen never to say a word. That silence also creates room for speculation. Rumors multiply. Some people believe the offender must be an outsider who slips into Ipswich unnoticed before disappearing again. Others argue that he has to be local, someone familiar with the roads, the isolated countryside, and the routines of the women he targets. Every theory sounds convincing until it collides with another unanswered question. What kind of man could carry on an ordinary life while 5 families searched desperately for the people they loved? Could he return home after each killing and sit down for dinner as though nothing had happened? Could he smile at colleagues the following morning? Could he pass police officers on the street without betraying even the slightest hint of fear? History suggests that such contradictions are not impossible. Some violent offenders have lived behind masks so ordinary that neighbors remembered them only as quiet, polite, and forgettable. Evil, investigators know, does not always announce itself through rage or chaos. Sometimes it hides behind routine, discipline, and an appearance so ordinary that no one thinks to look twice. As the days pass, Suffolk becomes the focus of one of the largest murder investigations modern Britain has ever seen. Resources continue to grow. Specialists from different disciplines work side by side, each examining the case through a different lens. Forensics seeks physical truth. Detectives reconstruct movements minute by minute. Intelligence officers analyze patterns. Behavioral experts study choices that may reveal fragments of the offender's personality. Each discipline holds only part of the answer. Together, they hope to reveal the whole picture. What they do not yet realize is that the investigation is already moving toward a decisive turning point. Hidden among the mountains of evidence is a trail so small it would be meaningless on its own, yet powerful when connected with everything else. A microscopic transfer. A pattern of movements. A coincidence that refuses to remain a coincidence. Piece by piece, the picture is beginning to sharpen. But on those cold December nights, no one can see the ending. The public sees only uncertainty. Families see only loss. Investigators see only an enormous puzzle with critical pieces still missing. And somewhere beyond the glow of television cameras, beyond the police cordons stretching across frozen fields, one man still believes he has left nothing behind. He cannot know that science is patient. He cannot know that careful investigators are often more dangerous than fast ones. He cannot know that every journey leaves a trace, every contact transfers something, and every attempt to erase the past creates new evidence waiting to be discovered. Those truths remain invisible for now. What is visible are 5 names that will forever be linked by tragedy, a community struggling to understand how such violence found its way into its quiet streets, and a winter that would be remembered not for Christmas lights or falling temperatures, but for the fear that settled over Suffolk like an endless blanket of fog. This is not simply the story of a serial killer. It is the story of 5 women whose lives were far more complex than the labels attached to them. It is the story of detectives forced to solve a race against time under the gaze of an entire nation. It is the story of a community learning that extraordinary evil can emerge in the most ordinary places. And before justice could ever be delivered, before a courtroom would hear the evidence or a jury would weigh the facts, there were families waiting for a telephone call they prayed would never come, officers stepping into another freezing field hoping not to find what they feared. And a city holding its breath, uncertain whether the darkest chapter had already been written or whether it was only just beginning. Long before the murders dominated newspaper headlines, Ipswich was known for entirely different reasons. One of England's oldest towns, it had grown over centuries beside the River Orwell, where merchant ships once carried wool, grain, timber, and countless other goods between Britain and continental Europe. Layers of history were visible almost everywhere. Medieval churches stood only a short walk from modern office buildings. Narrow cobbled lanes opened onto busy shopping streets. Along the waterfront, renovated warehouses overlooked marinas where sailboats drifted quietly with the tide. To many visitors, it was an ordinary county town, busy enough to feel alive, small enough that familiar faces were difficult to avoid. By day, commuters filled cafes before work. School children crossed streets in neatly pressed uniforms. Delivery vans threaded through traffic while market stalls welcomed early customers. Nothing about the town suggested it would soon become synonymous with one of the most significant murder investigations in modern British history. Yet, like every town, Ipswich had another side. When the evening rush faded and storefronts pulled down their shutters, different routines emerged. Streetlights replaced daylight. Industrial estates emptied of workers. Roads that had been crowded only hours before became strangely quiet. In certain parts of town, particularly around districts already known to local police, another economy began operating after dark. It was an economy built on desperation as much as demand. Women waited beneath orange streetlights or near familiar junctions, hoping the next vehicle to slow beside the curb would mean enough money to survive another day. Some had become known to outreach workers and police officers by first name. Others drifted in and out of the area depending on circumstance. Their lives were rarely simple. Many were living with drug dependency. Some experienced unstable housing. Others had become disconnected from their families after years of difficult relationships and repeated attempts to rebuild their lives. These realities did not define who they were, but they shaped the choices available to them. Those who worked regularly in the area learned its rhythms almost instinctively. They recognized which roads remained busy after midnight and which became deserted. They knew where streetlights offered a small measure of visibility and where darkness concealed approaching vehicles. They exchanged warnings about aggressive clients and quietly shared information that might help someone avoid danger. It was an informal network built not through trust alone, but through necessity. Police officers responsible for the area understood many of these routines as well. Patrols were familiar with the locations where street prostitution most commonly occurred. Outreach organizations attempted to maintain contact with vulnerable women, offering practical support, health services, and pathways into treatment programs for those who wanted them. Progress was often slow. Success was rarely measured in dramatic transformations. Sometimes success meant simply seeing the same woman alive another week. Against this backdrop, winter arrived. December in Suffolk is not defined by heavy snow every year but by damp cold that settles into clothing and lingers long after sunrise. Mornings often begin beneath low cloud and drifting mist. Rain leaves narrow roads slick, while nearby fields absorb weeks of moisture until boots sink into soft earth with every step. The countryside surrounding Ipswich creates a striking contrast with the town itself. Within only a short drive, busy roads give way to open farmland, wooded areas, hedgerows, and quiet country lanes bordered by bare trees. During daylight these landscapes appear peaceful, almost timeless. In winter twilight, they can feel isolated enough that the nearest house seems impossibly far away. For investigators, geography would later become one of the most important elements of the case. For the moment, however, it was simply part of everyday life. Drivers used those rural roads to reach neighboring villages. Farmers crossed them before dawn. Cyclists followed them on weekends. Dog walkers wandered along public footpaths without imagining that these familiar places would soon become scenes of painstaking forensic examinations. The calendar moved steadily toward Christmas. Shops displayed seasonal decorations. Office parties were being planned. Families prepared for school holidays. Radios alternated between traffic reports and festive music. In many homes, conversations centered on gifts, travel arrangements, and gatherings that had become annual traditions. For most residents, December promised familiarity. For a small number of families, however, routine had already begun to unravel. Some had grown accustomed to periods without contact from loved ones. Addiction often brought unpredictability. Phones changed. Temporary accommodation came and went. Days could pass without communication before someone eventually reappeared with an apology, an explanation, or simply a quiet acknowledgement that life had once again become difficult. Because of that history, concern sometimes developed gradually rather than all at once. Hope filled the gaps where certainty did not exist. Maybe she had gone to stay with a friend. Maybe she needed time. Maybe tomorrow the phone would ring. It is one of the cruelest realities in missing person investigations that ordinary explanations often remain believable until the moment they no longer can. Across Ipswich, people who never met the victims continued living parallel lives. Office workers finished late shifts. Nurses changed over at local hospitals. Taxi drivers navigated familiar routes. Security guards watched empty car parks through long winter nights. Countless ordinary stories unfolded alongside events that no one yet understood were connected. The future investigation would eventually weave many of these seemingly unrelated lives together through witness statements, vehicle sightings, phone records, and chance observations. But in those early weeks, every person possessed only a fragment of the larger picture. No one could see the whole. Not the families. Not the public. Not even the detectives who would later dedicate months of their lives to assembling every available piece of evidence. The setting for the story was already complete, a historic English town balancing prosperity and hardship, surrounded by quiet countryside, entering the darkest weeks of winter. All that remained was for tragedy to expose what had been hidden within it. As daylight faded earlier with each passing afternoon, Ipswich settled into a rhythm that was almost invisible to those who never ventured beyond its busiest streets. Office lights switched off one floor at a time. The last shoppers hurried toward car parks carrying Christmas bags wrapped in bright colors. Pubs gradually filled with after-work conversations, laughter, and the familiar clinking of glasses. Families gathered around dinner tables, television sets flickered to life, and curtains were drawn against the cold. Then another city quietly emerged. It was not separated by walls or distance. It existed within the same streets, only under different conditions. As traffic thinned and temperatures dropped, industrial estates, service roads, and dimly lit side streets became occupied by people whose lives rarely intersected with the city's daytime routine. For many women involved in street prostitution, the night was their workplace. Unlike offices or factories, there were no guaranteed wages, no predictable hours, and no safety measures beyond experience and instinct. Every encounter required a rapid assessment of risk. A driver slowing beside the curb could be polite, impatient, intoxicated, unpredictable, or dangerous. There was rarely enough time to know which. The decision often had to be made in seconds. A glance through a half-open window. A brief exchange. A calculation shaped by countless previous encounters. Some clients became familiar faces over time. Others appeared once and were never seen again. Regular customers were often considered less risky, though never entirely safe. New faces demanded greater caution, yet financial necessity sometimes left little room to refuse. Among the women, information traveled informally but efficiently. Descriptions of troublesome clients passed from one person to another. Certain vehicles became known. Certain behaviors were remembered. If someone experienced violence or intimidation, word spread quickly through the small community that gathered after dark. It was not a perfect system. It could not prevent every assault. But it offered something valuable in an environment where official protection was limited by circumstance. Local outreach teams understood this reality well. Their work extended beyond offering practical assistance. They built relationships over months and years, earning trust one conversation at a time. Some women accepted help immediately. Others declined repeatedly before eventually asking for support. There was rarely a straight path out of addiction, homelessness, or exploitation. Each story was different. Some had once held stable jobs. Some had been parents. Some had dreamed of careers that never materialized. Others had experienced trauma long before they ever stood beneath a streetlight waiting for the next passing car. Reducing those lives to a single label ignored years of personal history. The streets, however, rarely allowed time for reflection. Business continued despite the weather. December brought damp air that seeped through coats and gloves. Breath became visible beneath orange streetlights. Rainwater collected along curbs, reflecting passing headlights in distorted streaks of white and amber. Every approaching engine interrupted the silence before fading once more into the darkness. Drivers who entered these areas often believed they would remain anonymous. The exchanges were brief. Names were uncommon. Payment was usually made in cash. Both parties expected the encounter to end quickly before returning to separate lives. That assumption of anonymity would later become one of the investigation's greatest challenges. Detectives would need to identify individuals who had every reason to believe they had blended unnoticed into countless similar encounters. Meanwhile, the geography surrounding Ipswich quietly shaped daily life in ways few residents consciously noticed. Unlike densely built cities, Suffolk offered an abundance of open land. Fields stretched beyond the edges of residential neighborhoods. Small woodlands interrupted farmland. Narrow country lanes curved between hedgerows that limited visibility around every bend. Some roads saw only occasional traffic after sunset, particularly during winter evenings when darkness arrived before many people had finished work. To local residents, these roads were ordinary. To investigators, they would later become carefully mapped corridors requiring exhaustive searches. The contrast between town and countryside was striking. Within minutes, bright shop windows could disappear behind rolling fields and isolated farm entrances. The sounds of traffic gave way to wind moving through bare branches. Artificial light became scarce. In many places, only vehicle headlights cut through the darkness. Such landscapes possess a deceptive quality. During daylight they invite walkers, cyclists, and photographers. At night they offer privacy. Not the comforting privacy of solitude, but the unsettling isolation that comes from knowing few people are likely to pass for hours. This was one reason detectives would later devote enormous resources to understanding where the victims had been found. The locations themselves told part of the story. Not everything. But enough to suggest planning rather than chance. Back in the town, local police continued balancing routine responsibilities with growing concern about missing women. At first, each disappearance arrived as its own investigation. Officers gathered statements. Family members were contacted. Known locations were checked. Friends were interviewed. These procedures were familiar. People disappear for many reasons. Some leave voluntarily. Others experience mental health crises. Some seek temporary refuge from difficult circumstances. The challenge lies in determining which disappearances conceal something far more serious. Without the benefit of hindsight, investigators must consider every reasonable possibility. That uncertainty defines the earliest stages of almost every major criminal investigation. Patterns become visible only after enough information has accumulated. For the officers working these cases, there was no dramatic moment when alarms suddenly sounded across the county. Instead, concern intensified gradually as similarities became more difficult to dismiss. The women moved within overlapping social circles. Several were known to outreach services. Their disappearances occurred within a relatively short period. Each new report added another layer of unease. Yet evidence still remained frustratingly incomplete. The city itself offered few obvious answers. Thousands of vehicles entered and left Ipswich every day. Roads connected neighboring towns, villages, and major highways. Drivers from outside the area could arrive, remain briefly, and depart without attracting attention. CCTV coverage existed in some locations but was far from comprehensive. Mobile phone technology in 2006 provided valuable investigative opportunities, though not with the precision available today. Investigators faced the same dilemma encountered in many complex cases. There was no shortage of information. There was an overwhelming abundance of it. The challenge was deciding which details mattered. Among thousands of ordinary journeys, one belonged to a killer. Among countless conversations, one contained a crucial observation. Among hundreds of witnesses, someone had almost certainly seen something important without realizing it. That realization would shape everything that followed. Because somewhere within the ordinary routines of Ipswich, inside familiar streets, everyday traffic, and lives that appeared entirely unremarkable, the foundation of the truth was already waiting to be uncovered. By the final weeks of November 2006, Ipswich was living through two different versions of reality. For most residents, life continued according to the calendar. Christmas advertisements filled television screens. Schools prepared for holiday performances. Supermarkets became increasingly crowded with shoppers loading their trolleys with food for family gatherings. Strings of festive lights hung above the town centre, their warm glow reflecting from rain-soaked pavement after sunset. It was the season people associated with home, with family, with reunion. Yet only a few streets away, another reality unfolded every night, one untouched by celebration. There, survival mattered more than tradition. The women who stood in the cold were not thinking about decorations or holiday dinners. They were thinking about the next few hours. About earning enough money to pay for a room, to buy food, or to feed an addiction that had become impossible to ignore. Every decision was immediate. Every night began with uncertainty and ended only if they made it safely home. Most people passed through these areas without ever truly seeing them. A driver might glance briefly through a windscreen before looking away. A pedestrian might cross the street. An office worker leaving late might pretend not to notice. The women became part of the background, visible, yet often overlooked. That invisibility would become one of the most painful themes surrounding the case. Because when society stops seeing vulnerable people as individuals, it becomes easier to overlook the dangers surrounding them. The streets of Ipswich did not suddenly become dangerous in December 2006. Violence had existed there before. Women working in prostitution had long faced risks from robbery, assault, and intimidation. Outreach organizations, healthcare workers, and police officers were well aware of those dangers. They had spent years trying to reduce harm through education, support, and communication. But this was something different. This was not random violence. It was systematic. Someone appeared to be selecting victims from the same vulnerable community. Someone understood where they worked. Someone understood how easily a woman could disappear without immediately attracting widespread attention. That realization would later force uncomfortable conversations throughout Britain. Why were these women so vulnerable? Could more have been done to protect them? How should law enforcement, healthcare services, and social support organizations work together when individuals live at the intersection of addiction, homelessness, and exploitation? Those questions did not have simple answers then, and they remain complex today. At the time, however, investigators had a more urgent concern: stopping whoever was responsible. Inside Suffolk Police Headquarters, the atmosphere gradually shifted from routine investigation to coordinated emergency response. Maps covered conference room walls. Large tables disappeared beneath stacks of reports. Phones rang continuously. Detectives rotated between interviews, evidence reviews, and strategy meetings that stretched late into the night. Every officer understood that public confidence depended not only on finding the offender, but on preventing another killing. Resources expanded rapidly. Experienced detectives arrived from other departments. Forensic specialists prepared for increasingly demanding workloads. Analysts worked through thousands of pieces of information that, at first glance, seemed unrelated. The operation became one of constant motion. Even so, progress often felt painfully slow. Real investigations rarely unfold like dramatic television dramas. There is no single moment when every clue falls neatly into place. Instead, investigators spend countless hours eliminating possibilities. A witness remembers the wrong day. A reported vehicle cannot be connected to the victims. An anonymous tip leads nowhere. Most investigative paths end quietly, without headlines. Yet every dead end still serves a purpose. Each eliminated possibility narrows the search. Each verified fact strengthens the foundation beneath the case. Outside police headquarters, the media attention intensified. National broadcasters established temporary studios in Ipswich. Newspaper photographers waited outside police buildings from early morning until late evening. Reporters searched for neighbors willing to speak on camera, experts prepared to analyze developments, and anyone capable of offering insight into the growing mystery. The story no longer belonged only to Suffolk. It belonged to the entire country. People hundreds of miles away followed daily updates with growing concern. Many had never visited Ipswich. Now they could identify its streets by name. They recognized aerial images of surrounding farmland. They learned about places that previously existed only on local maps. The investigation had transformed a quiet county into the center of national attention. Yet despite the cameras, the headlines, and the enormous police presence, one person remained almost completely invisible. The killer. He was somewhere within this ordinary landscape. Perhaps driving roads he had traveled for years. Perhaps speaking casually with colleagues over coffee. Perhaps watching the same television reports as everyone else. No one knew. That uncertainty made the investigation uniquely unsettling. Unlike disasters caused by nature or accident, this threat possessed intention. The offender could choose when to act. He could adapt. He could observe police activity and alter his own behavior. Investigators were not simply solving crimes that had already occurred. They were trying to anticipate the decisions of someone they had never met. Every hour without an arrest increased the pressure. Every unanswered question carried consequences. Every missing piece of evidence mattered. The setting was now complete. A historic English town preparing for Christmas. A vulnerable community living largely unseen after dark. A network of country roads and isolated fields surrounding the city. A police force expanding into one of the largest investigations in its history. A nation watching with growing anxiety. And somewhere inside that landscape, hidden behind the appearance of an ordinary life, was a man whose identity remained unknown. The story that followed would no longer be about the place alone. It would become deeply personal. Behind every missing person report was a face. Behind every photograph was a family. Behind every headline was a life that had begun long before the streets of Ipswich ever became part of it. To understand how this investigation changed Britain, it is first necessary to understand the women whose names would become forever linked to it, not as headlines or statistics, but as daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends whose lives were shaped by hope, hardship, resilience, and the deeply human desire to find a way forward. That is where the story turns next. Before their names appeared on television screens across Britain, before their photographs were placed beside words like missing and victim, they were simply people living complicated lives. They had favorite songs. They had memories from childhood. They had moments of happiness that existed long before tragedy entered their stories. The investigation that followed would eventually focus on evidence, timelines, and the search for the person responsible. But behind every piece of forensic information were 5 women whose lives could not be reduced to the circumstances surrounding their deaths. To understand the Suffolk murders, it is necessary to understand the human beings at the center of the case. Because the tragedy was not that 5 women became victims. The tragedy was that 5 women who had already experienced difficult journeys lost the possibility of another chapter. The first name that would become connected to the investigation was Gemma Adams. Gemma was 25 years old. To strangers who later saw her photograph in newspapers, she became one of 5 women whose disappearance shocked a nation. But to those who knew her, she was not a symbol of a criminal case. She was a young woman with her own personality, her own relationships, and her own history. Like many people whose lives become complicated in adulthood, Gemma's story could not be explained by a single event or decision. Human lives are shaped by countless moments, family experiences, personal struggles, friendships, mistakes, and attempts to recover from difficult circumstances. Those who knew her remembered someone who could be warm and approachable. Someone who was part of a wider social circle, someone recognized within the community where she lived. By 2006, however, Gemma was living a life far removed from the hopes and expectations many people have when they are young. She was among the women working on the streets of Ipswich. That fact became central to news coverage after her death, but it was only one part of who she was. Behind that description was a person. A daughter. A friend. A woman whose absence was immediately felt by people who knew her. When Gemma disappeared, concern grew among those familiar with her routine. In communities where people often live with uncertainty, a period of silence can sometimes be explained away. Someone may have changed plans. Someone may have moved temporarily. Someone may simply not want contact. But eventually, explanations begin to disappear. Questions replace assumptions. And then fear begins. Gemma's disappearance was one of the first events that would eventually reveal the horrifying pattern developing around Ipswich. At the time, no one knew that her case would become part of something much larger. No one knew that investigators would soon be connecting her name with others. No one knew that the search for one missing woman would become a nationwide investigation. The second victim identified in the case was Tanya Nicol. At only 19 years old, Tanya was the youngest of the 5 women killed. Her age made the tragedy especially painful for many who followed the case. 19 is an age often associated with possibility, the beginning of adulthood, a period when many people are still discovering who they are and what direction they want their lives to take. Tanya's life had already taken difficult turns. Like the other victims, she was living in circumstances where vulnerability was part of everyday existence. Yet vulnerability does not erase individuality. It does not remove dreams. It does not remove personality. It does not remove the relationships someone has built throughout their life. To those who cared about her, Tanya was not defined by where she worked or the struggles she faced. She was a young woman whose future was interrupted. The details of her final days would later become part of a much larger investigation, but before detectives reconstructed movements and timelines, there was simply a family waiting for news. Waiting is one of the most painful experiences in any missing person case. At first, people search for reasons to remain hopeful. They replay conversations. They check phones. They wonder whether they misunderstood something. They imagine ordinary explanations because ordinary explanations are easier to accept than the alternative. Every unanswered call creates another moment of uncertainty. Every passing day changes the meaning of silence. For families of missing people, time does not move normally. Minutes become heavy. Days become filled with questions that have no answers. The discovery that followed would eventually replace uncertainty with a different kind of pain. The pain of knowing. The third victim was Anneli Alderton, aged 24. Anneli's story, like the others, reflected the complicated reality of the women at the center of the investigation. She was not simply someone whose name appeared in a police statement. She had relationships, memories, and experiences that existed long before the events of December 2006. When newspapers began reporting the murders, many members of the public learned about the victims through short descriptions. Those descriptions were necessary for reporting the case, but they could never capture the full reality of a human life. A person's existence cannot be summarized by the final weeks before their death. Anneli had lived years before those final moments. Years filled with ordinary experiences that never reached newspaper pages. The conversations she had. The places she visited. The people she met. The small details that family members remember but strangers will never know. That is often the cruelest part of cases like this. The public remembers the tragedy. Families remember the person. As detectives continued working, they began seeing connections between the women. Not just where they worked. Not just where they disappeared. But the community they shared. A small group of people who were often overlooked by the wider public had suddenly become the center of national attention. The investigation forced Britain to look closely at a hidden part of society. It revealed the dangers faced by women working in vulnerable conditions. It showed how quickly fear could spread through a community when people realized that someone was targeting those least able to protect themselves. But before the investigation became about the killer, the evidence, and the courtroom, it was first about loss. 5 separate lives. 5 separate histories. 5 families forced to experience unimaginable grief. And 5 women who deserved to be remembered as more than the circumstances of their deaths. The names that followed would complete the picture of a tragedy that would forever change Ipswich. Annette Nichols. Paula Clennell. 2 more women whose stories, like Gemma, Tanya, and Anneli, began long before December 2006. Their lives would soon become connected by one of the largest criminal investigations Britain had ever witnessed. But they were never connected by the crime alone. They were connected by the fact that they were human beings whose lives mattered. The names of the 5 women would eventually become permanently linked in public memory. But before they were joined together by tragedy, each one had lived a separate life, carried separate experiences, and faced separate struggles that shaped the people they became. The investigation would later examine patterns, the places they worked, the people they encountered, the movements that led to their final days. But patterns can sometimes hide the most important truth. A person is never just a pattern. A person is never just a statistic. A person is never just the last chapter of their life. The 4th victim identified in the case was Annette Nichols, aged 29. Among the 5 women, Annette was one of the oldest. Like the others, she had become known publicly only after tragedy had already taken away the opportunity for people to know her story on her own terms. When a person becomes connected to a major criminal investigation, the world often learns about them in reverse. The final days are examined first. The last known movements become the focus. The circumstances surrounding their death become the center of attention. But a person's life does not begin at the moment they enter a police report. Annette had a past that existed independently of the investigation. She had people who knew her before the headlines. People who remembered moments that would never appear in official documents. A conversation. A joke. A disagreement. A celebration. A simple ordinary day that meant nothing to anyone else but remained important to those who shared it with her. That is the reality behind every victim of violent crime. The world sees the ending. Loved ones remember the entire story. Annette, like many people caught in difficult circumstances, had experienced challenges that affected the direction of her life. By 2006, she was part of the vulnerable community working on the streets of Ipswich. It was a world shaped by uncertainty, where each night carried unknown risks. For women in that environment, danger was not something imagined after the fact. It was something they already understood. They knew about theft. They knew about threats. They knew about violence. They knew that certain situations could become dangerous within seconds. Yet knowing the risk does not mean a person can simply escape it. Many people looking from the outside struggle to understand why someone would continue working in a place where danger is obvious. But those closest to the issue understand that circumstances are rarely simple. Addiction can control decisions. Poverty can remove choices. Isolation can make alternatives seem impossible. A person may recognize that something is harmful and still feel trapped within it. That complexity became one of the central discussions surrounding the Suffolk murders. The victims were not simply women who happened to be in the wrong place. They were women living within a difficult reality that existed long before the investigation began. Their deaths forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions about vulnerability, social support, and the people who are often ignored until tragedy brings them into view. The fifth victim was Paula Clennell, aged 24. Paula was among the last of the 5 women discovered. Like the others, her disappearance initially existed as an individual case. A family searching for answers. A missing person investigation trying to determine what had happened. Nobody immediately knew that her name would soon be placed alongside 4 others. Nobody knew that investigators were facing the work of a single offender. Nobody knew that Suffolk was about to become the focus of international attention. For those close to Paula, however, the most important fact was not the investigation. It was her absence. The empty space left behind. The unanswered questions. The knowledge that someone they cared about was no longer returning home. When someone disappears, families often experience a painful conflict between hope and fear. Hope encourages them to believe there is still a chance. Fear whispers that the truth may be worse. Every missing person case begins with uncertainty. The human mind searches for explanations because uncertainty is difficult to endure. People imagine possible reasons. They replay conversations. They search for something they may have missed. Was there a warning sign? Could something have been done differently? Could someone have noticed earlier? These questions often remain long after investigations end. The victims' families were not simply waiting for information. They were trying to understand how a person they loved could vanish from their lives. As the investigation developed, the public began learning more about the women through interviews with relatives, friends, and people who had known them. These personal memories challenged the simplified images that often appear during breaking news coverage. The women were not defined only by addiction. They were not defined only by their occupation. They were not defined only by the circumstances that placed them at risk. They were individuals who had experienced both difficult moments and ordinary human moments. They had personalities. They had relationships. They had memories. Their lives contained far more than the tragedy that ended them. This distinction became especially important as the media attention grew. Some reports focused heavily on the circumstances that made the women vulnerable. Others examined the broader social issues surrounding street prostitution. But behind every discussion was a simple truth that could easily become lost. 5 people were dead. 5 families were grieving. 5 futures had been taken away. The investigation into their deaths would eventually become a story about forensic evidence, police strategy, and courtroom arguments. But before those elements could unfold, the victims themselves had to be recognized. Because justice is not only about finding the person responsible. Justice begins with acknowledging who was harmed. It begins with understanding that the victims were not simply evidence in a criminal case. They were human beings whose lives had value long before investigators ever opened their files. The women of Ipswich came from different backgrounds and had followed different paths. Their struggles were not identical. Their personalities were not identical. Their hopes and fears were not identical. What connected them was not the crime. What connected them was that someone chose to take away their lives. And as detectives began reconstructing the final moments of each woman's journey, they were not only searching for a killer. They were searching for the truth about 5 people whose stories deserved to be told. The further investigators looked into the lives of the 5 women, the clearer one truth became: the case could never be understood only through the evidence left behind at crime scenes. Evidence could reveal where someone had been. It could reveal when something happened. It could reveal connections that the human eye could never see. But evidence could not explain who these women were. It could not capture the sound of their voices. It could not describe the relationships they built. It could not preserve the small details that made them unique. That part of the story belonged to the people who knew them. To their families. To their friends. To those who had shared moments with them before the world learned their names through tragedy. The lives of Gemma Adams, Tanya Nicol, Anneli Alderton, Annette Nichols, and Paula Clennell were shaped by difficulties that many people never saw. Their struggles placed them in a vulnerable environment, but vulnerability was only one part of their identity. A person can be struggling and still have dreams. A person can make mistakes and still be loved. A person can be living through hardship and still deserve protection. Those simple truths became impossible for Britain to ignore after the Suffolk murders. For many members of the public, the case was the first time they had looked closely at the lives of women working on the streets. The headlines brought attention to a hidden community that existed alongside ordinary daily life but was often separated from it by misunderstanding and judgment. People began asking questions that extended beyond the murders themselves. What circumstances had brought these women there? What support systems were available? How could vulnerable people be protected before tragedy occurred? The answers were complicated because the problems were complicated. There was no single reason why someone might become involved in street prostitution. Lives rarely follow straight lines. Economic hardship, personal trauma, addiction, unstable relationships, and lack of support could combine in ways that gradually narrowed a person's choices. From the outside, it is easy to look at someone's situation and imagine simple solutions. Real life is rarely simple. Many people who worked with vulnerable communities understood this long before the murders happened. Outreach workers often met people at their most difficult moments, not as headlines, but as individuals needing assistance. Their work involved patience, trust, and repeated contact. Sometimes progress was measured in small victories. A person accepting medical help. A person entering treatment. A person finding temporary accommodation. A person returning for another conversation. These moments rarely attracted attention, but they represented efforts to protect people whose lives were already filled with risk. The Suffolk murders changed how many people viewed that responsibility. Suddenly, the dangers faced by vulnerable women were no longer an issue discussed only by specialists and local organizations. The entire country was watching. The streets of Ipswich became a symbol of a larger conversation about safety, inequality, and the way society responds to people living on the margins. But while those conversations were important, they could never replace what the families had lost. For them, the story was not about social policy. It was not about media coverage. It was not about statistics. It was about a person who was no longer there. A familiar voice that would never be heard again. A chair at the table that would remain empty. A birthday that would arrive without a celebration. A future that had disappeared. This is the painful reality of violent crime investigations. The public eventually moves toward the next story. Newspapers change their front pages. Television cameras leave. The world continues. But families continue carrying the loss. The investigation into the Suffolk murders would eventually produce arrests, evidence, and a conviction. It would become a case studied by police forces, discussed by criminologists, and remembered by the public. But before all of that, there were 5 women. 5 separate lives. 5 individuals who existed beyond the crime committed against them. Their stories remind us that victims are never only victims. They are the moments before the tragedy. They are childhood memories. They are friendships. They are private struggles and personal victories. They are people who once woke up each morning without knowing what the future held. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Suffolk case is not only that 5 women were killed. It is that the world was forced to recognize their humanity only after they were gone. As investigators began reconstructing the final days of their lives, they faced a difficult task. They had to examine the circumstances that surrounded the victims while never losing sight of the individuals themselves. Every timeline represented a real person. Every location represented a moment in someone's life. Every piece of evidence represented the search for answers that families desperately needed. The question was no longer only, who had done this? It was also, how had these women been brought to the final moments of their lives? And how could someone have moved through their world, crossed paths with them, and carried out such violence without being noticed? The answers would come through a combination of determination, technology, and painstaking investigation. But first, detectives had to understand the beginning of the story. The final days. The last known movements. The moments before 5 separate lives became connected forever. Because every investigation begins at the same place. Not with the offender. Not with the evidence. But with the person whose life was taken. The winter of 2006 arrived in Suffolk with a familiar coldness. The kind of cold that settled into the streets after sunset, turning pavement damp and shining beneath streetlights. The kind of cold that made people hurry from one doorway to another, pulling coats tighter and lowering their heads against the wind. For most residents of Ipswich, December was a month of preparation. For 5 women, it became the final chapter of their lives. At first, there was no single moment when everyone understood what was happening. There was no dramatic announcement that a killer had entered the community. There was only a series of disappearances, each one separated by days and surrounded by uncertainty. That is often how fear begins. Not with a scream. Not with a warning. But with silence. A person does not answer a phone call. A familiar face does not appear where it usually does. A routine is interrupted. And slowly, almost reluctantly, people begin to wonder whether something terrible has happened. The first disappearance connected to the Suffolk murders was that of Gemma Adams, a 25-year-old woman known within the Ipswich community. Like many women working on the streets, Gemma's nights followed a pattern. The area where she worked was familiar territory. The people around her were familiar faces. The risks were understood, even if they were never completely predictable. On the evening she disappeared, there was nothing immediately obvious to suggest that it would be different from any other night. There was no public confrontation. No visible struggle witnessed by strangers. No moment that would immediately reveal danger. From the outside, it appeared to be another ordinary night in a place where ordinary nights carried hidden risks. That was what made the case so difficult. The person responsible did not create chaos. He created normality. The killer, investigators would later conclude, had found a way to approach vulnerable women without attracting attention. He operated within routines that already existed, using circumstances that made the victims accessible while making the danger difficult to recognize. For the women working those streets, every interaction required trust in a situation where trust was fragile. A vehicle stopping nearby. A driver speaking through a window. A decision made quickly. The difference between a normal encounter and a deadly one was invisible until it was too late. After Gemma disappeared, those who knew her began noticing the absence. At first, concern may have competed with hope. There were reasons people could disappear temporarily. A person might stay with someone else. A phone might be lost. Plans might change. But as time passed, the silence became harder to explain. Then another woman vanished. Tanya Nicol, only 19 years old. Her disappearance intensified the unease because it suggested that Gemma's case might not be an isolated event. 2 missing women from the same vulnerable community. 2 lives interrupted. 2 families waiting for answers. At this stage, investigators were still working through uncertainty. They had no complete picture. They did not yet know the scale of what they were facing. They did not know whether the disappearances were connected or whether coincidence had brought separate tragedies together. But among the women working the streets, fear moved faster than official conclusions. They understood something was wrong. The streets had their own communication system. Information traveled through conversations, warnings, and shared experiences. Women who might not have trusted outsiders often trusted each other because they understood the same dangers. When one person failed to return, others noticed. When another disappeared, the concern became impossible to ignore. The question changed. It was no longer, "Where did they go?" It became, "Who is taking them?" The answer was still unknown. But the possibility of a predator moving among them had begun to take shape. Then came the discovery that transformed the investigation. On December 2, 2006, the body of Gemma Adams was found in a wooded area near Hintlesham, close to Ipswich. The discovery changed everything. A missing person investigation became a murder inquiry. The location itself carried significance. A quiet area away from the busiest parts of town. A place where someone could arrive without drawing immediate attention. A place where the landscape provided isolation. For forensic investigators arriving at the scene, every detail mattered. The position of the body. The surrounding environment. The condition of the area. Anything that might reveal what had happened before the victim was found. A crime scene is not simply a place where something terrible occurred. It is a record. A collection of details left behind by actions that can no longer be witnessed. Investigators study those details because the victim cannot tell the story herself. The evidence must speak. As officers worked around the scene, the wider implications became impossible to ignore. Gemma was not simply missing anymore. She had been murdered. And somewhere, the person responsible was still free. The discovery created a new urgency. If this was an isolated killing, investigators needed to understand why. If it was connected to other disappearances, they needed to move faster. The next days would provide a horrifying answer. On December 8, the body of Tanya Nicol was discovered in water at Copdock Mill, another location near Ipswich. A second victim. A second family receiving devastating news. A second confirmation that something far more serious was happening. The distance between the discoveries was not just measured in miles. It was measured in fear. The community began realizing that the women were not simply disappearing. They were being targeted. The police investigation expanded rapidly. Officers began comparing the circumstances surrounding both deaths. Similarities emerged. Both women were connected to the same area. Both had disappeared within a short period. Both belonged to the same vulnerable community. The possibility of a serial offender was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. For residents, the realization was terrifying. A killer was not only present. He was active. And he had already succeeded more than once. The streets where women had worked for years suddenly carried a new meaning. Every vehicle became a question. Every stranger became a possibility. Every unanswered disappearance became a potential warning. The investigation was now a race against time. Because detectives were not only searching for justice for the women already lost. They were trying to prevent another name from being added to the list. After the discovery of Gemma Adams and Tanya Nicol, the atmosphere surrounding Ipswich changed completely. The uncertainty that had existed in the early days was replaced by something far more frightening: recognition. This was not a series of unrelated disappearances. The women were connected. The circumstances were connected. And somewhere, someone had committed acts of violence against people who shared the same vulnerability. For investigators, the priority was immediate. They needed to understand not only what had happened, but what could happen next. A killer who had already taken 2 lives could strike again. The streets where the women worked became places of intense attention. Police officers increased patrols. Investigators spoke with women who remained in the area, asking questions, offering warnings, and trying to gather information from a community where trust had often been difficult to build. Many women were frightened. Some stopped working entirely. Others continued because they had no realistic alternative. Fear could change behavior, but it could not always change circumstances. For those still returning to the streets each night, every approaching vehicle carried a new level of uncertainty. The familiar routines that had existed for years suddenly felt dangerous. A short conversation that once seemed ordinary could now feel like a potential threat. The danger was not visible. That was the most terrifying part. The person responsible did not look like a threat approaching from a distance. There was no obvious warning. No sign that separated a safe encounter from a fatal one. The killer appeared to have used ordinary interactions to gain access to his victims. That ability to hide violence behind normal behavior made the investigation even more challenging. Detectives began examining the final movements of the victims in greater detail. Who had seen them last? Where had they been? What vehicles had been nearby? Had anyone noticed unusual behavior? The answers came slowly. Witness memories were collected. Phone records were examined. CCTV footage from surrounding areas was reviewed. Every possible connection was investigated. But while police worked through evidence, the number of victims continued to grow. On December 10, the body of Anneli Alderton, aged 24, was discovered in woodland near Creeting St. Mary, outside Ipswich. A third woman. A third crime scene. A third family forced to face the reality that their loved one would not be coming home. By this point, the fear across Suffolk had reached a new level. 3 women from the same community had been killed within a matter of days. The possibility of a serial murderer was no longer speculation. It was becoming the central focus of the investigation. Forensic teams worked carefully at each location, searching for connections. They knew that a single piece of evidence could change everything. A fingerprint. A fiber. A trace of DNA. Something left behind by a person who believed he had removed all evidence of his involvement. The challenge was enormous. The crime scenes were not controlled environments. They were open areas exposed to weather, time, and the movement of people and animals. Every investigation begins with the question of what happened, but outdoor scenes add another question. What has been changed since it happened? Rain can move evidence. Wind can disturb traces. The passage of time can erase details. Investigators were fighting not only against the person responsible, but also against nature itself. Meanwhile, public anxiety continued to increase. The phrase Suffolk Strangler began appearing in media coverage. The name was created by journalists attempting to describe the case, but for many people it represented something more frightening than a headline. It represented the possibility that a dangerous individual was moving through familiar streets unnoticed. The victims' families faced a different reality. While the public discussed theories, families experienced grief. While television programs analyzed evidence, families waited for official confirmation. While strangers debated possibilities, loved ones remembered birthdays, conversations, and moments that belonged only to them. Every new discovery reopened the wound. The investigation became national news, but for the families, the attention could never replace what had been lost. As detectives continued examining the victims' backgrounds, another difficult reality became apparent. The killer had selected women who were already living at the edge of society. Women whose disappearances might not immediately receive the same urgency as others. This factor became a significant part of public discussion after the case. Many questioned whether vulnerable people receive enough protection before tragedy occurs. The murders forced attention toward a community that had often been ignored. The victims' circumstances did not make their deaths less important. If anything, they highlighted how easily vulnerable people can become targets. On December 12, the body of Annette Nichols, aged 29, was discovered. 4 women. 10 days. A community searching for answers. At this point, investigators were no longer simply building a murder case. They were attempting to understand the mind of someone who appeared to be escalating. The pattern was becoming clearer. The victims were women involved in street prostitution. They were approached during their work. They disappeared. Their bodies were later found in areas around Ipswich. The method of killing indicated a close personal encounter rather than a distant attack. This was someone who was physically close to his victims. Someone who had opportunity to observe them. Someone who was comfortable enough to repeat the same behavior. That raised the most disturbing question of all. How many times had he done this before? And would he do it again? Investigators knew that finding the answer required understanding the offender's behavior. Why these women? Why these locations? Why this method? Was he motivated by anger, control, opportunity, or something else entirely? Behavioral analysis could not provide a name. It could not identify a suspect by itself. But it could help investigators understand the person they were hunting. Every decision made by an offender leaves behind information. The choice of victim. The approach. The movement of the body. The effort taken to avoid detection. All of these choices reveal something. The killer had left a story behind. The challenge was learning how to read it. And while police searched for meaning in the evidence, one final tragedy was about to confirm their worst fears. 5 women would ultimately become connected to one of Britain's most notorious criminal investigations. The 5th victim was still missing. And somewhere, the person responsible remained free. The final days of December 2006 became a period that the people of Suffolk would never forget. By now, the fear was no longer limited to whispered conversations among women working the streets of Ipswich. It had spread throughout the entire community. Parents worried about daughters walking home at night. Residents who had never before paid attention to certain areas of the town now looked at them differently. Roads, fields, and quiet corners of the countryside that had once been ordinary places had become associated with a growing sense of danger. 4 women had been found. 4 lives had been taken. And still, investigators did not have the person responsible. The investigation continued around the clock. But for detectives, the passage of time carried a heavy weight. Every day without an arrest meant the possibility that the offender could act again. Every unanswered question represented a risk that another family could soon experience the same devastation. Then came the disappearance of Paula Clennell, aged 24. Paula had been known within the same community as the previous victims. Like Gemma, Tanya, Anneli, and Annette, she was living a life shaped by difficult circumstances and vulnerability. Her disappearance immediately carried a different meaning. By this stage, nobody could dismiss it as coincidence. Nobody could assume that she had simply left voluntarily. The pattern had become too clear. Women connected to the same area were disappearing. Their bodies were being found nearby. Someone was responsible. For those who knew Paula, the waiting period was unbearable. The first stage of any disappearance is filled with uncertainty. Families search for explanations because the alternative is too painful to accept. They look for ordinary reasons. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she had gone somewhere else. Maybe she would return. But with every passing hour, hope becomes harder to maintain. Investigators moved quickly. Every available resource was directed toward finding Paula and determining whether she had become the next victim. Officers searched known locations. Witnesses were interviewed. Information from the previous cases was reviewed again. Every similarity mattered. Every difference mattered. In a major investigation, details that appear insignificant at first can later become the key to understanding everything. Then, on December 12, 2006, the body of Paula Clennell was discovered near Nacton, close to Ipswich. The worst fears had become reality. 5 women. 5 murders. A single investigation. The case had reached a horrifying conclusion that investigators had hoped to avoid. The person they were searching for was not finished, or at least there was no way to know whether he would stop. The discovery of Paula transformed public fear into something approaching national alarm. The country had followed the story as a mystery. Now it was understood as a hunt. A hunt for someone who had repeatedly targeted women who were already vulnerable. A hunt for someone who had managed to remain hidden despite committing crimes that had brought an entire police force into action. For investigators, the similarities between the victims were impossible to ignore. The women had been connected through the same area. They belonged to the same social environment. They were approached during their work. The method of killing showed a consistent pattern. The offender was not acting randomly. He appeared to have a specific victim type. That information was both useful and disturbing. Useful because patterns create opportunities for investigators. Disturbing because patterns suggest repetition. A person who follows a pattern is often someone who has developed confidence. Someone who believes they understand the situation. Someone who believes they can avoid being caught. The investigation now focused on understanding that confidence. What allowed him to approach the victims? Why had he chosen these particular women? How did he move them away from public areas without attracting attention? How did he travel through Ipswich and the surrounding countryside without witnesses coming forward earlier? These questions became central. Detectives began reconstructing the victims' final movements in extraordinary detail. The last places they were seen. The people they interacted with. The vehicles connected to those moments. The possible routes taken afterward. A murder investigation is often a battle between two timelines. The timeline of the victim's final hours. And the timeline of the offender's actions. Investigators must find where those timelines meet. Somewhere within those overlapping moments is usually the answer. As forensic teams continued examining evidence, the pressure on the investigation increased. The public wanted immediate answers. Families deserved justice. Police officers knew that every mistake could have consequences. Yet despite the pressure, investigators understood that a rushed case could fail. A suspect arrested without strong evidence could walk free. A person wrongly accused could destroy an innocent life. The goal was not simply to find someone. The goal was to find the right person and prove what had happened beyond doubt. The Suffolk murders had now become one of the largest investigations in British criminal history. Thousands of people would become involved in the search for answers. Thousands of pieces of information would be collected. Thousands of possibilities would need to be examined and eliminated. But before the breakthrough came, investigators first had to understand the world surrounding the victims. They needed to examine the streets where they worked. The routines they followed. The people they encountered. And the possibility that the killer was not a stranger hiding in the darkness, but someone who had been close enough to observe their lives. Because the most frightening question was no longer whether the offender existed. That was certain. The question was, who was he? And how had he managed to stand among ordinary people while carrying such a terrible secret? The answer would eventually come from the smallest details. A trace left behind. A connection overlooked. A piece of evidence that seemed insignificant until placed beside everything else. The killer had believed he could separate himself from his crimes. But every action leaves a mark. Every journey leaves a path. And every secret eventually risks being discovered. The first hours after a body is discovered are among the most important moments in any murder investigation. Before theories. Before suspects. Before arrests. There is only the scene. A place that was once ordinary, now transformed into the beginning of a search for truth. For the officers arriving at the locations connected to the Suffolk murders, the landscape around Ipswich looked almost unchanged. The winter countryside remained quiet. Fields stretched toward the horizon. Trees stood bare against the grey sky. Roads continued carrying ordinary traffic only a short distance away. But within the boundaries created by police tape, everything had changed. A field was no longer simply a field. A woodland path was no longer simply a path. A patch of ground became a place where every detail mattered. Every footprint. Every disturbed branch. Every object out of place. The discovery of Gemma Adams on December 2, 2006, marked the moment the investigation moved from uncertainty into something far more serious. Before that day, Gemma was a missing woman. After that day, detectives were investigating a homicide. The difference was devastating. A missing person case carries hope. A murder investigation begins with loss. For officers involved, the first responsibility was to secure the scene. Before investigators could understand what had happened, they had to protect what remained. Crime scenes are fragile. Evidence can disappear through weather, contamination, or simple human movement. The area was restricted. Access was controlled. Every person entering and leaving had to be recorded. This process may appear routine, but it represents something fundamental in criminal investigation. The scene is the silent witness. The victim cannot describe what happened. The offender may never admit the truth. The evidence must speak instead. Forensic specialists began their work carefully. They photographed the surroundings from multiple angles. They documented the position of objects. They examined the ground. They collected possible traces left behind by whoever had been there. At first, every possibility had to be considered. Was the location where the crime occurred? Was the victim moved afterward? Had the offender attempted to remove evidence? Had anything been left behind accidentally? The answers would not come immediately. Forensic investigation is rarely dramatic in the way television portrays it. It is patient, precise, often repetitive. A single sample may require hours of analysis. A tiny trace invisible to the human eye can become a crucial link months later. At the scene, investigators were searching for the story hidden within physical evidence. The body represented the final point of a journey. Their task was to reconstruct everything that came before. Where had Gemma been? Who had she encountered? How had she arrived at that location? And most importantly, who had been responsible? As detectives examined the circumstances surrounding Gemma's death, they also revisited the disappearance of Tanya Nicol. At this stage, investigators faced a difficult question. Were these two separate tragedies? Or were they connected? The possibility of a link changes everything in a criminal investigation. One victim means one set of questions. Multiple victims create a pattern. Patterns allow investigators to look beyond individual events and search for behavior. The similarities were concerning. Both women were connected to the same area. Both disappeared within a relatively short period. Both belonged to the same vulnerable community. The possibility that one offender was responsible began moving from suspicion toward serious consideration. Then, on December 8, the discovery of Tanya Nicol's body provided the answer detectives feared. The cases were connected. The investigation expanded immediately. Now police were not searching for answers for one family. They were searching for the person responsible for two deaths. And they had to consider the possibility that more victims could follow. The discovery sites became central to understanding the offender. Crime scenes reveal choices. A person committing a crime makes hundreds of decisions, often without realizing their significance. Where they approach, where they travel, where they leave evidence, where they believe they can avoid detection. Each choice provides investigators with information. The locations chosen around Ipswich suggested that the offender knew the area well enough to move between public and isolated spaces. The countryside surrounding the town offered countless places where someone could stop briefly without attracting immediate attention. Small roads, hidden entrances, areas away from houses, places familiar to locals but invisible to many outsiders. Geography became another piece of evidence. Investigators began asking questions not only about the victims, but about the person who selected these locations. Did he live nearby? Did he work nearby? Was he familiar with these roads through everyday life? Was he someone who appeared ordinary because he belonged there? The answers were unknown. But the search area was becoming clearer. Meanwhile, the forensic examination continued. Each victim was approached with the same care and respect. Behind every evidence marker was a person whose family deserved answers. That principle guided the investigation. The women were not merely elements in a criminal pattern. They were individuals. Their final moments mattered. The truth mattered. As news of the discoveries spread, the pressure on investigators increased dramatically. The public wanted reassurance. Families wanted information. The media wanted updates. But detectives understood something the public could not always see. The strongest investigations are built carefully. A single mistake can damage an entire case. A piece of evidence collected incorrectly can become unusable. A rushed conclusion can lead investigators in the wrong direction. So while the world demanded answers, detectives continued working through the details. Slowly. Methodically. One piece at a time. The investigation had entered a new phase. The question was no longer whether a crime had occurred. It was how many secrets the crime scene could reveal. And somewhere within those quiet fields and winter landscapes around Ipswich, the first traces of the person responsible were waiting to be found. As the investigation expanded, the landscape surrounding Ipswich became the focus of one of the most intensive forensic searches Britain had ever witnessed. To the public, the locations where the women were found appeared quiet and almost untouched. Fields, woodland, and rural paths that had existed for generations suddenly appeared on television screens across the country. But to investigators, these places were no longer simply parts of the Suffolk countryside. They were evidence. Every location represented a moment in time. Every location held questions. The work of understanding what had happened began with the smallest details. Crime scene investigators are often searching for things that most people would never notice. A tiny fiber caught on vegetation. A mark left on the ground. A trace transferred during physical contact. A fragment that appears meaningless until it is examined under scientific analysis. The person responsible for the murders had left these scenes believing he controlled the story. Investigators were attempting to prove otherwise. One of the greatest challenges in the Suffolk case was that the discoveries took place in outdoor environments. Unlike a room where walls and objects preserve a clearer record of events, open landscapes are constantly changing. Weather affects evidence. Rain can wash away traces. Wind can move objects. Animals can disturb locations. Time itself becomes an enemy. Every hour matters. Every day matters. The longer evidence remains exposed, the more difficult it becomes to determine exactly what happened. This created enormous pressure on forensic teams. They worked through winter conditions, carefully documenting each scene before removing anything. The process required patience because every action had consequences. A single overlooked detail could become the difference between suspicion and proof. At the same time, detectives were trying to reconstruct the final movements of each victim. The investigation moved backward. From the place where the women were found. To where they had last been seen. To the people they had encountered. To the moments before they disappeared. This backward reconstruction is one of the most challenging parts of homicide investigations. The victim's final hours often contain the key to identifying the offender, but those hours can be fragmented into incomplete pieces. A witness may remember seeing someone but not remember the exact time. A camera may capture a vehicle but not reveal who was inside. A phone record may show communication but not the conversation itself. Investigators were collecting thousands of fragments and attempting to build a complete picture. The discovery of multiple victims also changed the way police examined the evidence. A single crime scene can contain uncertainty. Multiple linked scenes can reveal behavior. The similarities between the locations, the victims, and the circumstances allowed investigators to begin considering the offender's habits. Serial offenders often develop routines. They may choose familiar environments. They may repeat methods that have worked before. They may become more confident after each successful crime. That confidence can become a weakness. Because repetition creates patterns. And patterns can be found. Investigators began examining the relationship between the victims and the person responsible. The women had not been attacked randomly in public places. The offender appeared to have approached them within an existing environment. He understood where they would be. He understood when they would be there. He understood the circumstances that made them accessible. That suggested planning. Not necessarily a complex plan. Not necessarily one without mistakes. But enough planning to create a dangerous illusion of control. The public, meanwhile, was struggling with fear and uncertainty. The media coverage grew larger every day. Television crews remained stationed in Ipswich. Newspapers followed every development. Experts were invited to discuss possible offender behavior. The phrase Suffolk Strangler became widely used, turning the investigation into a national story. But for investigators, the media attention created both opportunities and challenges. Public awareness could encourage witnesses to come forward. Someone who had previously dismissed a strange detail might reconsider. A person who remembered seeing an unusual vehicle might contact police. A forgotten conversation might suddenly become important. But intense media attention could also create speculation. Rumors spread quickly. False information consumed valuable investigative time. Unverified claims had to be separated from reliable evidence. The detectives working the case needed facts, not theories. And the facts were still being assembled. One important aspect of the investigation was understanding the victim's daily environment. The women worked in a community where people often noticed things that outsiders did not. A familiar car. A new customer. A person behaving differently. A conversation overheard briefly. These small observations became extremely valuable. Police appealed directly to people who knew the area, especially those who might have information but had not yet spoken. Investigators understood that some witnesses might hesitate. The victims lived within a marginalized community, and some people feared judgment, involvement with police, or consequences for coming forward. Building trust became essential. Every conversation mattered. Every person who agreed to speak potentially provided another piece of the puzzle. The investigation was no longer only about forensic evidence. It was about human memory. Human observation. Human connection. Somewhere among the people who moved through Ipswich during those weeks was someone who had seen something important. The challenge was finding that person. As the search continued, detectives also began considering another disturbing possibility. The offender may not have appeared unusual at all. He may not have matched the image many people imagined when they heard the words serial killer. History has repeatedly shown that dangerous individuals can exist within ordinary environments. They can hold jobs, maintain relationships, follow routines, blend into communities. That possibility made the investigation more difficult. There was no obvious figure to search for. No clear warning sign. No person who immediately stood apart from everyone else. The killer was hidden not because he lived outside society. He was hidden because he was inside it. That realization became one of the most unsettling elements of the case. While Suffolk searched for answers, the offender remained unknown. But every crime scene continued to tell a story. Every piece of evidence narrowed the possibilities. Every forensic test moved investigators closer. The killer had created a pattern. Now police had to decode it. And somewhere within the enormous amount of information collected during the investigation, the first signs of a breakthrough were beginning to emerge.